All right, y'all, we're gonna have a chat here on different club face alignments, checkpoints you should look for, and kind of what the effect of different club face alignments will have on your swing. All right, so it really doesn't matter what your grip is, where the club face should be is relatively the same. Now, the wrist angles you might use to get into those positions might vary. So someone who has a stronger grip, they can get away with cupping their wrist at the top, right? And that's a pretty square club face. Someone with a weaker grip, they cup their wrist like that. That club face is wide open. So they might need to bow their wrist a little bit more or have it a little flatter to get it square at the top. So the first checkpoint we're going to look at is P2, which is when our club is parallel to the ground in the takeaway. So what I usually like to look for is to have the club just outside the hands. But more importantly, this club face is matching our spine angle. If we get it too closed here, we risk getting it a little too close at the top and maybe across the line. Someone who gets it too open here, that means they're probably rolling their hands, and if they have a shorter swing, that would mean laid off, or it would get way across the line if they're at the top. But it doesn't really matter too much what it is right here. It matters kind of what it is coming into impact. But a good rule of thumb is in your takeaway to have this club face matching your spine angle, right? The next one we're going to look at is at the top of the swing. So a good reference point here is to have the club face matching this forearm. Someone who has a little bit higher arms, the club face might be a bit more vertical, right? Someone who has a flatter plane, that club head is going to be a little bit more facing the sky, right? So it doesn't matter if you're across the line, you're laid off, you generally want it, a square position would be this club face matching your forearm. And usually with the best players, what you'll see, unless they have a bowed wrist, if this wrist is cupped or flat, you'll start to see this club face move into a more closed position coming down. Now, if they have a bowed wrist and this club face is open, they'll generally square it a little bit later. If they have a bowed wrist and a little bit stronger grip, that means this club face is already closed at the top, similar to DJ. From there, they'd have to hold that all the way down, and they may even actually get it a little bit more open coming down through this shallowing mechanism. Notice as I shallow the club here, that club face actually opens up a little bit. So if you see someone like DJ, he has a strong grip and a bowed club face, or a bowed wrist, leading to a really closed club face. So to make sure he doesn't hit a huge pull, he does two things. He really shallows out the club, and then he gets this lead arm or trail elbow really in front of him to hold off the face, right? Because if he pushed up and extended, well, that club face would be way too close. We hit hooks and pulls. So at the top of the swing, we want to look for a square club face, which is a great place to start for most players. You'd want this club face matching this forearm here. Now, the next checkpoint we're going to look for, this is where it really starts to matter. It doesn't really matter too much where it is in the takeaway. It starts to matter more at the top of the swing. But the closer we get to impact, the more important this club face is. Because if it's still open right here, it's going to be really hard for you to square it efficiently. And you're going to probably have a lot of forearm movement in order to square that face. So, the next checkpoint we're going to look at is kind of halfway down when this club, the club head is kind of on your back here. It's not quite P5, which would be lead arm parallel in the downswing. It's not quite P6, where the shaft is parallel in the downswing. It's somewhere probably P5 and a half, where this club face is right on your body. This is roughly where you'd want to see the club face pointing straight up, like that. This would be really closed. This would be quite open. Now there's a caveat with this. If you're hitting a driver, you can afford to have it a little bit more open, because as we come down, due to the nature of us pushing up because we're hitting up on the ball, our body is not going to be as bent over. It's going to be a little bit more vertical. So that would mean it'd have to be, the club face would have to be more vertical at this point. So when this shaft is on your body right here with the driver, it might be just a touch open. But for an iron, we generally want this club face pointed nearly vertical. And then by the time we get down to P6, kind of where the money starts to happen, which would be shaft parallel, we want this club face to match our spine angle. With a driver, because our body is going to be a little bit more vertical, club face might be more vertical, and that allows for us to release the hands coming into impact and hit up on the ball. There's going to be a little bit of a later release with the driver, but for an iron, this club face should be matching our spine angle. And that allows us to really pivot through and just have minimal forearm rotation. So notice this club face is open, I pivot into the ball. I'm either going to hit a shank or I'm going to hit a huge block, right? So a lot of times what I see in my lessons here, they have this club face open at P6 and they have to roll the forearms over really fast. And what that does is it pushes the path into out and it rapidly closes the club face. So a lot of better players, they'll hit hooks. Now, someone who has an open club face in the downswing, they don't have the right sequencing, they're actually more likely to come over the top. Because notice, as I come over it, that actually closes the club face a little bit and allows us to hit the slice that actually keeps the ball somewhere in bounds. Now, a better player, because they have good sequencing, they'll actually tilt out of it and get a little too shallow and hit those hooks like I was talking about before. So someone who has more closed club face, they would actually shallow the club more. What you see with a lot of people who have strong club faces is, notice how closed this club face is, right? Well, look what happens if I push this elbow in as a shallowing move. Boom, that club face starts to open. That's one way to match it up. That's generally for someone who would like to draw the ball, right? And someone who has too strong of a club face, they would start to push this elbow in from the top to get this club face in a more functional position. So a great drill here you can do is to get into your setup and just take this club back to P6. Now, for an iron, I want it somewhere on your hands. This would be a little too shallow. With a driver, it's okay to have it a little bit behind your hands, once again, because we're extending our body. We have to give, and because we're extending our body, that club face is going to be a little bit more behind our hands. Notice what happens as I extend my torso, that club face starts to go behind my hands. So that is natural. But for an iron, we want it somewhere on the hands, right? That allows us to pivot through. So a good drill, take it back to P6 and get this club face square to our back line. And from there, you can learn to rotate through. Now there's no such thing as just a passive pivot, right? The arms are still moving, because if I didn't rotate my arms, this is what would happen. No one hits the ball like that, and that club face is still quite open. So arms are still rolling over as I pivot, but it's mostly body rotation. So a really good drill to get this thing square, and then just hit a few punch shots like that to get the club face stable, teach your body how to pivot coming into impact. So just to go over this again, some checkpoints we're going to look for. Takeaway, matching our spine angle. At the top, club face matches our forearm. Halfway down, this club face is near vertical. And then at P6, this club face is once again matching our spine angle. So it's up to you to look at your swing on video and figure out, well, where am I going wrong here? If you're someone who has a really good club face at the top, then it gets down here and it's wide open, you may need to add a little bit of wrist flexion and transition to get this club face closed. If you're someone who gets down here, this club face is super shut, you might actually start backing out of it and get the path going way into out, the opposite of what a slicer would do with an open club face. And that allows you to hook the ball and not hit a huge pull. So if you have too close of a club face, you might want to neutralize it at the top, or if it is neutral and it's still too closed down here, add a little bit more of a shallowing move in to open that club face up and allow you to get in a more functional spot. All right? So that's our breakdown on the club face. And like I said, it doesn't really matter which grip you have. That's a basic fundamental in most swings. Now, depending on what shot shape you hit, you can have it a little bit more open here if you're someone who hits a draw. You have it a little bit more closed if you're someone who cuts it. And that allows you to rotate more and get the path going out to in and get that ball starting right and cutting back. So it just depends on your matchup, but that's a really good checkpoint to start with.